It's the Wonkhe Show. The Lifelong Learning Entitlement finally has some legislative bones. Alan Milburn is back with his review of NEETs, and we ask our guests what else caught their eye in the world of higher education this week. It's all coming up.
And we've all read our Blunders of Government book by Ivor Crewe and know about, missteps that have happened in the past with sort of similar concepts. So it's a long old game. I think this is the really tricky bit. Let's see what happens over the next few years.
Welcome back to the Wonkhe Show, your weekly way into this week's higher education news, policy and analysis. I'm your host, Mark Leach, and here to chew the fat over this week's news. As usual, we have three brilliant guests. In Essex, it's Anne-Marie Canning, Opportunity Mission Challenge Director at UKRI. Anne-Marie, your highlight of the week, please.
Oh yes, such a highlight, something I've been working towards for years and years. This week we launched a funding competition for people to develop wraparound support for children in temporary accommodation, so pupils who are experiencing homelessness. And I think it's such a breakthrough moment to put together housing and education in that way. So yeah, funding calls live and a real milestone for us over in the Opportunities Mission.
In Camberwell, it's Johnny Rich, Chief Executive at the Engineering Professors Council. And Push, Johnny, your highlight of the week, please.
My own little piece of lifelong education. For the past few years, I've been learning to sing, and last week I passed my latest grade. And so my highlight this week is choosing the pieces for my next grade and forcing my poor family to listen to me practice.
And in London, it's Debbie McVitty, Wonkhe's editor. Debbie, your highlight of the week, please.
Well, I'm definitely having one of those crazy weeks where it's just everything's back to back. I mean, it's quite hard to pick, but I think I will go for a dinner that I co-hosted with a good friend of the show, Mary Kernock-Cook, CBE, on Monday evening. It was all about higher education innovation, and we had new providers, we had people at the forefront of technology and thinking about AI, and we chewed the fat until late in the night.
Right, so we start the week with the LLE. Debbie, tell us what's going on.
Well, we inch ever closer to the rollout of the LLE. So the intention is that people should be able to apply for LLE modules in areas that the government has designated strategic priority in September for starting in January. And this week we've had another step in the direction of making that happen. So two things. One is that we've got the draft statutory instrument, which is going to set up some key elements of making the kind of technical plumbing work behind the scenes. So some of that is about codification about, 1 credit equals 10 learning hours and thinking about the kind of prorating of student maintenance and those sorts of things. And there's also some guidance on standardizing the transcript that students will have to be issued at the end of each LLE module. And we've got a list of all the providers that have applied and been approved to offer LLE modules in one or more of the relevant subjects. So it's a medium-sized step forward, I'd say.
Johnny, let's start with the symbolism of this. 1 credit equals 10 learning hours. That's now going to be the law. It feels like quite a significant moment, doesn't it? I mean, it's suddenly a kind of shared currency, something that kind of makes this real.
Yes, there is that. But the whole thing feels a bit to me like it's the LLE bus moving up into 5th gear whilst it's got no idea where it's heading and no idea how much fuel is in the tank. It's the 130 providers who've stepped up to offer LLE modules is, it is, to quote Yes Minister, a brave decision. They're going to have to do a lot of planning and marketing to make it work at a time when most of them could probably do without the risk. Meanwhile, not only is it not proven that there is any significant demand for these LLE modules from students, the 2 pilots run so far are pretty good evidence that there is no significant demand. I mean, Mary Kernock-Cook, who's already had a mention, would probably point out that you build demand by making something available. And that's a fair point. But from the point of view of learners, the lack of enthusiasm makes sense to me, because the offer to them is an entitlement to get into debt, to study a module that employers supposedly want but aren't willing to fund. And if learners still decide to go for it, overcoming all the non-financial obstacles like balancing work and life commitments and so on, then when they've completed their module, they'll be competing for jobs with full-blown graduates. And if they do manage to get those jobs, then their student loan deduction from their pay packet on a per-month basis is going to be the same as if they'd done a full degree. So sure, they might get to pay it off when many graduates won't, but the media, with all the stories in the media about student loan interest. It's hardly reassuring.
So I guess I'm hearing that Johnny is an LLE skeptic. I guess we've not talked about this.
Actually, no. Sorry, sorry to jump in, but no, I'm not. I happen to believe that this is really important. And we have to make it work because we absolutely need lifelong learning, both for individuals' life chances and to have something like resilience in a changing labour market. What the government should be doing is bringing the LLE and the growth skills levy together. We need the two systems aligned so that learners can learn what they want to when they want to, but for it to be easier and cost less to pick courses that employers want to invest in.
I think, Johnny, you're completely right, because I think that the real tension between inherent in this agenda is, on the one hand, what you want is a kind of flexible system that people can dip in and out of, that providers can design the thing that is, relevant for the labour market, that there can be a kind of coherence across thinking about, and it should be very much oriented towards, broad growth and skills. What I see, though, in LLE very strongly is a sort of, I guess, defensive design approach on the part of DFE. And I can really see why that has happened, because this is about protecting public money. Because I think the version, and I'm not saying this is what you're arguing for, of course, but I think there's a version of this which is very much a free-for-all. Providers all over the sector offer whatever they think they can kind of get numbers for. It's got no particular kind of relationship to any kind of employment outcome, but they can kind of sort of, they can sort of frame it as being that. And students and the public waste a lot of money. So there's been all these kind of checks and balances put in to avoid that kind of that outcome, which we've seen before in various guises at different points in the history of higher education. But I think the consequence then is what you're left with is something that is not going to be very appealing and is probably not going to work in the way that we need it to, in terms of having a lifelong flexible offer available.
I mean, this is a tricky part of the rollout, isn't it? This is, no offense to HE nerds out there, this is the quite boring bit of getting the thing stood up. And I think the real cut through will happen when, the LLE, hopefully becomes a household name. Employers are aware of it. I think there's potential for real cut through at combined authority level, thinking about those regional link-ups that Johnny mentioned. So it's a long old journey. And I think this bit is the really tricky bit. I think what Debbie says around defensive design was always going to happen, though. We've all read our Blunders of Government book by Ivor Crew and know about, missteps that have happened in the past with sort of similar concepts. So it's a long old game. I think this is the really tricky bit. Let's see what happens over the next few years.
I think what's fascinating to me as well is this question about whose job it is to make this work, right? Because, you could argue, I think, that from DFE's perspective, their job is to do the plumbing. And then it is down to providers and regional policymakers and, to sort of figure out ways to realize the potential that the system that has been designed offers. I think Johnny's not wrong to say that this is a very difficult time for them to be doing that, but I also don't necessarily think that what you want is DFE kind of being really heavy-handed about exactly how this should work and all the rest of it. So there's a bit of saying, well, look, but by sort of letting this unfold, we will begin to understand what works and see what works, and we can kind of build on that, rather than kind of saying we're going to try and push a version of this at a very large scale before we've understood exactly what that journey looks like, I guess.
I think that's fair. And DFE have done a relatively good job on trying to work out the plumbing. And I mean, there are a couple of nerdy things that I could nitpick, but generally that's right. The detail is being worked out properly, and the rest is by DFE in terms of what they should do. And then the actual delivery needs to be worked out by providers. The bit that's missing is the political bit. There hasn't really been a proper debate about any of this in Parliament. There was basically an unopposed bill in the last Parliament, under the last government. And then this government hasn't chosen to bring any legislation around it. They're planning to, but it's very, I forget the technical terminology, but it's secondary legislation. Thank you very much. It is, so we haven't had the debate about, as I was saying before, where the bus is heading. What's the point of this? And you can design all the plumbing you like, but if you end up delivering the hot water to the wrong part of the house, you haven't done what you wanted to do. And that's, I'm afraid, what we've got here in that it's absolutely right to build a lifelong learning facility. What has not been worked out is what shape that really should take. And Anne-Marie's absolutely right that these are baby steps at the moment. And maybe the whole thing will evolve over time, and in a couple of years' time, I'll be singing its praises.
I mean, doesn't this come back to this problem that we're seeing with government, across a range of issues at the moment? So LLE, came from a former government, has been carried through and is now in implementation phase. The headline story is probably quite a positive one here, which is lifelong learning entitlement becomes a reality. All these positives of why we've designed this system, et cetera, but there's no cut through for telling that story and for getting that across to, ordinary folks out there who might be interested in what the LLE has to offer. So I don't know if necessarily some of the issues that we're experiencing with the LLE unique to the LLE. It seems to be something that we're struggling with in government terms across the shop, basically.
Yeah, and you really need that narrative, don't you? You really need that kind of strong story about how this is going to expand opportunity, because also it's those sorts of framing ideas that help providers orient their offer. And you get that sort of in what is essentially a kind of a market of autonomous providers doing the thing that they think will work. You can get a degree of alignment by just by being really clear about what your policy intentions are, by opening up a conversation about how to make it work in practice, and doing all of that kind of, I guess, the softer side of politics that this government has sort of consistently sort of not done brilliantly at doing. And you're right, that is a real shame.
Yeah, not helped by having a sort of minister that's really sort of taken it on and sort of own the agenda and talked about it a lot. And I've got a theory actually that the political debate that Johnny says we haven't had, and I think he's right about. I think it's kind of going to be retrofit to this. So when going into this, the LLE, it has all the hallmarks of a classic blunders of our government chapter, as Anne-Marie pointed out. You just think, oh my God, is this Department of Education is nowhere near up to doing something this complicated, this difficult, this long term, with such big implications for public money. So no politician looking at that is going to go, oh yeah, well that's going to happen next Parliament. I'm gonna run with this. I'm gonna promise to roll out, gonna get in front of it. Exactly. So everyone's been looking at that, going, yeah, if it turns into a thing, great. If it doesn't, I'm just exactly, yeah. So I think cometh a ambitious new leader of a Labour Party, maybe a more activist education secretary or higher education minister, all of which we could see in the next coming months. I reckon they might look at that now and go, okay, we're starting to take shape. I can build around this as an agenda. I can start talking about it, and then I think it could be off to the races if someone really wants to make it a thing. But yeah, I completely get also why it just hasn't been, because it just looks like a nightmare from the get-go.
I mean, it's interesting then that 130 providers, including, I mean, I think one of the things that we noted briefly was that we haven't seen the big research intensives, but there's plenty of Russell Group and research intensive institutions have signed up to deliver on some of this. So I think the sector in that sense, I think, has given it a bit of a vote of confidence. Says, yeah, we will give this a go. And that I think is a really good platform to build on. I am slightly concerned about, and one of the other things is a really technical point, but about the transcript, because the stuff that's on there, and I'm really curious about how institutions are going to open up a conversation about credit transfer and whether one LLE module is going to equip students to move to a different institution and how they're going to run that. Because I can't really see, credit transfer is can of worms we probably don't want to open up right now, but there's nothing on that guidance that would show me as an institution what that student has learned, that I would be able to make a judgment about whether they were able to learn, the next thing in my curriculum. And that, I think, is a real, and I think this is the only way you kind of make that work is by institutions having a good understanding of each other's curricula, or actually some kind of, and this is where it gets really interesting potentially, you could probably do some kind of clever building of kind of core sort of elements of curricula for the purposes of LLE in order to facilitate those transitions. But that would require institutions to really step up and do that. So I think,
well, actually, that happens already in some courses. It happens in engineering, for example, where you have something called AHEP, which is the framework for the learning outcomes that you have to have an accredited course. And there's none of that in there. The transcripts don't require you to say whether the module was part of an accredited course. That's really dangerous in engineering. That's going to be a complete nightmare for portability.
You do have to name the kind of, the parent course though, don't you? So would that, and genuine question, would one provider know if that other provider, that course was accredited? Would that be kind of known at engineering level, or would that?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I have no idea. I don't know. And the fact that I don't know.
This is where you want, this is where you want like real specialists designing these things, isn't it? Or some kind of sector body rather than kind of, because, yeah.
But to some extent, I am a specialist. I should know that. And the fact that I don't know that, it means that this is really esoteric knowledge. And so it probably is a problem, I think. And so, yeah, there is that. Also, DK will not forgive us if we don't mention unique learner numbers, because that is a major omission from the transcripts, because that would have allowed the portability, because everything would be standardized and centrally stored, and it would make things so much more smooth to move between courses, to understand what your next pathway was, transparency even in recruitment, because you could see who had what.
And I think because also we increasingly have the technology to be able to link up people to career paths, to skills and knowledge acquired in a sort of non-manual way, because AI can sort of begin to do some of that, and also provide people advice about what else they can take and what they might be qualified for. So making sure that there is a data architecture underpinning this is one of the kind of plumbing elements that is really kind of future-proofing the system and kind of putting people in a strong position to deploy those sorts of things that universities are really beginning to think about how they build into their kind of core systems.
Well, that sounds far too practical and sensible for the British state to be able to get over the line. I've got to draw a line under this one. Thanks, everyone. Right, let's see who's been blogging for us this week.
Hi, I'm Jamie Tully, a lecturer in psychology at the University of Exeter and the social class stream lead on the EDI committee for the psychology department.
Hi, I'm Hazel Mycroft, an associate professor of social psychology at the University of Exeter and the director of education and student experience for the psychology department. And in this week on Wonkhe, we've been blogging about the importance of having honest conversations about social class and social mobility in higher education. In our article, we outline how working class academics face unique career disadvantages compared to their middle class colleagues, and we take a look at the data showing persistent inequalities for working class people, including the existence of the class pay gap.
We also look at things from a personal perspective, discussing how the additional pressures placed on working class academics can be exhausting, and how it is tough to have frank conversations about class with colleagues because of a common experience we call middle class fragility. Finally, we talk about taking positive action, including ending the kind of academic casualization that disproportionately impacts working class people, and how universities can join organisations such as the British Psychological Society and the Trades Union Congress in applying pressure on the government to make social class a protected characteristic.
Right, Alan Milburn's back with his review of NEETs. Johnny, tell us about it.
Thank you. Yes, Alan Milburn, former health secretary, former social mobility czar, and current friend of Wes Streeting, was appointed by Keir Starmer last year to lead this review of what to do about NEETs. NEETs are young people aged 16 to 24 who are not in education, employment, or training. And there are just shy of 1 million NEETs in the UK, which is just over 1 in 8 young people. Of course, if you can't get a job early in life, it can be hard ever to get started, and your whole career can be stunted as a result. So 1 in 8 is just not acceptable. And as a society, we can't allow that for their sake, let alone for the cost of that to the taxpayers and to national productivity. Anyway, Milburn will be publishing his first report from this review in the next few weeks and has been teasing it to a few newspapers. And if you were to believe their headlines, this is an absolute disaster for graduates who make up about 1 in 10 of the NEETs. given that they also make up probably around a third of the 16 to 24-year-olds, 1 in 10 seems to me actually a pretty good endorsement for doing a degree, because it means you're a lot less likely to find yourself unable to get work if you have a degree. Looking at it another way, if 1 in 8 young people is a NEET, about 1 in 80 young people is a graduate NEET. And by the way, also, it seems that many of those may be long-term sick. So that, it's worth digging into the data here. That said, Milburn was talking about how education no longer provides the same protective power, to use his phrase, that it once did. And that is a fair point. But his main point so far was that just as there's no cap on HE student numbers in England, there should be no cap on access to technical qualifications in FE college.
Anne-Marie, I was interested to read his comments about HE, sort of pushing it into a kind of a HE versus rest of the system kind of problem again, which is where we've been the last few years of kind of Labour and Tories. Is this an HE problem?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, our starting point is that this review is needed, is timely, and we desperately have to take action on what's happening with NEET young people. It is a bit of a shame to see the sort of suggestion that teachers have overemphasised higher education for a few reasons, really. I mean, 1, 20 years ago, they were doing exactly what the government asked them to do. And 2, it's very hard to advise young people on other routes when they're not well defined, they're not well codified, and you're also judged in terms of accountability measures for destinations into places like HE. So I feel for teachers and advisors sort of being given this stick. I mean, more broadly, I really struggle to understand why Labour government can't own one of its best ever achievements whilst also switching its attention onto NEET young people and vocational routes and technical education. The job here is to walk and chew gum. And we don't get to do both of those things by tearing down one side of the system. So it is slightly disappointing. That said, I reckon there'll be loads of really sensible, smart suggestions from the review. It's just we're just hearing the same thing over and over again, and it is slightly disappointing, I would say. So yeah, there we go. It's the interim report. It's not the final one. I think sector should make recommendations and representations through to the Milburn review in the intervening time.
I couldn't agree more with Anne-Marie's analysis of that and the undermining of the legacy of what did work and the ability for the sector to do anything, or for teachers, for young people moving forward with this sort of cloud hanging over on Debbie. I mean, I just feel like it's saying, too many people going to university or not being pushed towards the right routes, it's kind of a decision. It's kind of like a decision not to do anything about anything, isn't it? Because consistently governments have not funded the skill system and the vocational system adequately. It's been too complicated, and it's been too difficult to navigate. And that is a systemic failure of government policy going back a long time. So to blame teachers or young people or parents for, not having, successfully navigated that just feels like a total cop-out, doesn't it? Because it absolutely doesn't point to doing anything about any of those problems in that part of the system. And it certainly doesn't do anything for people who do choose to go into higher education when that's the right choice for them. So as I say, it's a decision to do nothing. And that's the thing that frustrates me more than anything else, along with, as I say, and Anne-Marie put so well, this, the undermining of, decades of policy and practice which came from evidence and strong political will to really raise the whole country's educational attainments. And yeah, how do we get back here? And what do universities do about this problem now? And what's the response to the NEET's review, apart from to say we're working really hard, we're trying to give people opportunities, we're doing our bit of the system? What's the answer to him?
Well, let me try and put the counterexample, because I think that what surfaces at the kind of public discourse level is incredibly under-nuanced. But I think, as ever, you've got to sort of try and overcome that sort of initial kind of sort of distaste for the kind of way that these things are expressed, and try and sort of get to the grain of truth at the bottom of it, and the thing that is being tapped into at the kind of politics level. Because I think that, and I think Anne-Marie's point about sort of saying, well, like one of the reasons why teachers have encouraged young people to progress into university is because university has historically been a really good bet, a pretty safe bet in terms of your investment, because you only pay back what you earn in proportion, in proportion to your earnings. And generally speaking, a good way of preparing yourself for the next step. And all of that, I think, remains true, but it's less true than it was. And at a sort of policy level, the reliance on university to kind of scoop up everything that looks like education potential has led to this imbalancing. So if you're a young person looking at your options and thinking, I want choices that are local to me, I want a kind of breadth of choice, then that is just not the case for a lot of young people today. And the kind of assumption that you then, and university, particularly in the kind of world that we're living in and the economics of that, just looks like a really expensive choice, and people being kind of pushed to that when the outcomes feel a bit more uncertain. You can sort of see why that causes public concern. I don't think the answer, obviously, is just to say, let's try and get everyone into FE courses. This is that's such a kind of terrible policy analysis. I think what I hope we'll see from the NEETs review, and I think that there's a hell of a lot of expertise inside universities who can really understand this, is really thinking about what are the root causes of this. So some of this is about long-term health and illness, including mental health issues, and that's a kind of that is a thing that as a country we need to get on top of, for our youth and thinking about their opportunities. Some of this is about mismatch between the qualifications people have and the kind of opportunities that are available to them in their regions. And, that is something that requires another sort of set of policy prescriptions. And I think quite fundamentally, it requires the sector to pull together and say, across FE and HE, and for that kind of harmonization between, sort of say, actually, let's map out what those opportunities are and think about how they link to job prospects and try to understand that a little bit better so that we can make the right prescription in the right part of the country, in the right bit of industry and all the rest of it, rather than making these kind of sweeping statements, which just upsets a sector that's been working hard, makes teachers feel like they failed and doesn't, and as you say, doesn't address the kind of lack of opportunity for young people who might genuinely want to have more choice in front of them than, well, you better go to university because that's the one thing that is pretty guaranteed right now.
Thanks, folks. I mean, you could ask where we'd be if we didn't have such strong widening participation and routes into university more broadly on the NEET numbers. But just to sort of pick up Debbie's point about what are the root causes here. I mean, obviously, it's not the overemphasis on university. Peter Hyman's got this brilliant project launching called Young NEETs in Their Own Words, which I think is a really healthy counterbalance to lots of the sort of discourse around NEETs, hearing it in young people's own words. And he's got this, really damning expression, which is, he calls this generation the stranded generation and says we're all guilty of a neglect of an entire generation. He says, we've created the circumstances, we've run the economy into the ground, locked children away during COVID, regimented them in schools, turned a blind eye to bullying, given them the social media tools of destruction, and then we've let them drift. And I think it's this broader assessment of what it's like to be a young person in the UK today, which is where we'll get some more of the fruitful breakthroughs. Yes, obviously, we know we need a better, more secure FE sector, but also I think there's a role here for higher education and the research power. So universities across the country are doing incredible work understanding what's going on with this sort of NEET epidemic and what can be done about it. Just seen some amazing research from the Centre for Longitudinal Studies over at UCL, looking at the sort of scarring effects of being not in education, employment or training when you're 50 years old. So, NEET has always been an issue, but we have got a moment right now where I think it's probably of national importance that we sort of get across this. And universities need to be a part of the answer, not just a sort of part of the analysis as to how we've got here.
We mustn't let the Milburn review end up as a trade-off between HE and FE, as Mark was saying earlier. I think that's a really dangerous zero-sum game. And so my tip to all the wannabe prime ministers who may be listening is that you should make one change to fiscal rules, which is to reclassify funding for post-compulsory education as infrastructure investment, not spending. And then say, if necessary, you will borrow to invest in human capital, in people, because not only does it improve productivity and build growth, but it also saves on welfare and healthcare. And most importantly, it lets young people achieve rather than becoming needs. And it means that we'd be looking at the cost of dealing with NEETs up against the cost of something like HS2. And if we can borrow 100 billion to build HS2, from which we'll see no benefit for 30 years, then we can surely fund our HE and FE sectors properly and see instant returns on that investment.
Every one of us who works in higher education knows our own patch pretty well. Far few of us can hold the whole picture: funding, teaching, research, students, data, governance, people strategy, all of it at once. That's the gap that Making Sense of Higher Education is built to close. It's a new programme from Wonkhe. 10 live online modules, 1 hour each, running from October to April, delivered by the team you already listened to on this podcast, plus special guests across the series. It's built for people new to the sector, for governors, for mid-career professionals, and for academic leaders who want something different. Early bird tickets are open now. There's 10% off until the 31st of July. Further discounts are available for Wonkhe subscriber organisations and large groups. You can find the full programme and book your place at wonkhe.com/events. And finally this week, each of our guests has picked another news story from the week that's caught their attention. Anne-Marie, what was yours?
Yeah, I've been really interested in this AI summit back at my old stomping ground at King's College London. It's an AI summit that's been focused on sort of AI and workforce futures, which, lots of people are thinking about right now. They've done some extensive polling to look at attitudes of different groups towards AI and what it will do to jobs in the future. Absolutely fascinating. My favourite finding is that people think AI will take jobs, but it won't take their job in particular. And I think we're all guilty of that, thinking we're special and the machines can't replace us. But there's some incredible differences in attitudes towards AI and the workplace. One of the interesting things is they have a very, very clear gender differential in the polling, and they've got students as a discrete group that they've looked at. And there's huge differences between male and female students. I really like the question about whether AI has helped you to think better as a student. Male students very confident that it's helped them to think better. Female students much less confident of that. And also students very clear that AI is negatively affecting the ability of fellow students to think, but not their ability to think. So there's this really interesting sort of thing going on where, AI in relation to yourself versus others is expressed in really unique ways. There's lots and lots of contrast between what employers think about AI and what workers think about AI. Generally, workers feel quite negative about AI, but intend to use it anyway. So it's a sort of dose of, pessimistic realism. Folks who've heard me talk before know I talk about optimistic realism, but I think this is pessimistic realism that we're seeing here. And there's some interesting findings for higher education, sort of academics, administrators around whether education is preparing people well for the world of AI. And interestingly, really strong appetite from across all different groups for government-backed training on adopting AI, using it in the workplace, using it in education, making full use of it for the common good. So absolutely fascinating. I mean, the lineup for the conference was, it just looked absolutely stellar. And I think this will be a theme that we encounter more and more going forwards, obviously.
I saw DK's piece this week on the concern that the government might be about to cut the Strategic Priorities Grant, which Universities UK has pointed out, very absolutely rightly, pointed out would be a bad idea. And for those who don't know, the SPG is the fund that the government gives to OFS to correct the failures in the market, such as the fact that the fees that most students think are too high are in fact nowhere near the cost of delivering some of the courses that the government most needs universities to offer, such as medicine, nursing, engineering. There's also the funding for access, which is kind of important if you see higher education as a system that is intended to create opportunities for all. And it pays for some other stuff too. But basically, the SPG is equivalent to about 1/10 of all the income from home student tuition fees. And a cut would be a direct cut to the government's 5 missions that they used to talk about so much after the election. By way of an example of this, in the Engineering Professors Council's last submission to the Treasury before the comprehensive spending review, we pointed out that the shortfall in funding engineering courses via home fees was about half the cost. And the SPG cuts that shortfall to about a third of the cost. And so the industrial strategy requires an increase in the number of engineering graduates. And so our calculations, we sort of ran the numbers and came up with the need for an SPG uplift of nearly 900 million. In other words, nearly doubling it, just to bring engineering courses up to a point where they break even and can realize the government's stated aims in the industrial strategy. And so, as I said, a cut in the SPG as opposed to a rise would be a bad idea.
Well, I note with interest that new data has just landed from the Office for Students about how it is perceived by the providers that it regulates, so universities, colleges, specialist providers. And I think that'll be a kind of topic of conversation later today and overnight. So do everyone keep your eye on the site for DK's write-up of that. But actually, the thing that I wanted to flag was OFS related, which is that earlier this week, OFS confirmed that it's not going to contest the ruling in the free speech case against the University of Sussex. That the judge ruled that there were various kind of things that the OFS had done wrong, and basically ruled against OFS in the issuing of a fine to the University of Sussex. So the OFS is not going to appeal that. It's accepted the ruling, and we're all going to move forward. So the next thing that happens now is that there will be the complaint scheme for concerns about free speech will be up and running, but OFS is going to have to review some of the guidance that it's issued around how it will kind of come to judgments in cases where it suspects that universities have contravened free speech legislation, and the mechanisms that it uses to conduct investigations in those areas. So I think that will all be. I think it's probably the right thing for OFS not to kind of start an argument about this. You know, this has been a long running case. It was conducted under a previous regime. The duty on OFS to protect free speech continues, and I think it's got bigger fish to fry and a completely different cast of characters in charge. So I think that's a very sensible decision to say we're not going to contest this. We're going to accept that we didn't get that one right, and we're going to try and move on and get it right next time. So that's kind of where we are with all of that.
So that's about it for this week. Remember to go in deep on anything we discussed today. You'll find links in the show notes on Wonkhe.com. Don't forget to subscribe. Just search for The Wonkhe Show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to get ahead of everything that's going on in UKHE, just click subscriptions on the site to find out more. So thanks very much to Anne-Marie, Johnny and Debbie, Michael Salmon for making the show happen behind the scenes. We'll be back next week. Jim will be here. Until then, stay wonky.